The pharmacist slid the bag across the counter without looking up. "That'll be $214. Desmond Obi reached into his coat pocket. His fingers found the edge of his wallet, and he paused there for just a second. The kind of pause that nobody notices unless they've done it themselves. Unless they've stood in that exact spot, doing the math in their head one more time, hoping somehow the numbers have changed since the last time they checked. They hadn't changed. He pulled out 4 50s, placed them on the counter. Then he reached into his other pocket and found a 10, 2 5s, and some coins. He laid those down too. The pharmacist finally looked up. "Sir, it's $214. "I know," Desmond Obi said. "I'm a little short." He was 61 years old. He had spent 32 years as a cardiac surgeon at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto. He had held hearts in his hands, literally, physically held them, and coaxed them back into rhythm when they had given up. He had trained 12 surgeons who were now running departments across the country. He had 2 honorary degrees from universities he'd never attended because he was always in surgery when the ceremonies happened. None of that was visible right now. What was visible was a big man in a worn winter coat, going gray at the temples, standing at a pharmacy counter in a Shoppers Drug Mart in Hamilton on a Tuesday afternoon in February, coming up short on a prescription for his sister. He was $47 short. Desmond Obi had retired 18 months ago, not entirely by choice. The hospital board had restructured. His department had been merged. They'd given him a plaque and a handshake and an early retirement package that had seemed reasonable until his sister, Adesdi, was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. Because the universe has a particular sense of humor, and moved in with him, and the prescriptions started stacking up, and his fixed pension didn't quite stretch the way he'd planned. He hadn't touched his savings because Adesi's daughter in Vancouver didn't know how bad things had gotten, and Desmond had promised himself he wouldn't be the reason that young woman's life got disrupted. She had a baby. She had her own things. So here he was, $47 short, trying to decide quickly and without showing it on his face which of the 3 medications in that white paper bag Adesi could skip for a few more days. He knew which one. He'd already decided on the drive over. The blood thinner could wait until Friday, probably. He almost said it. He almost said, "Can you just set aside one of the bottles? I'll come back Friday." He had the words ready. "Hey, hold on." The voice came from behind him. Desmond Obi turned. The young man was maybe 24, 25. He was wearing a Tim Hortons uniform, the dark polo, the cap tucked into the back of his belt like he'd just come off shift. He was black, lean, with the kind of tired in his eyes that doesn't come from one late night but from a long stretch of them. He was holding a small basket with shampoo, cold medicine, and a pack of gum. He had been standing 2 people back in the line. He had heard everything. "How much is he short?" the young man asked the pharmacist. "Sir, that's between—" "How much?" The pharmacist looked at Desmond Obi. Desmond Obi looked at the young man in the Tim Hortons shirt. "47, Desmond said. He didn't know why he answered. He should have said, "It's fine, don't worry." He should have said, "I've got it handled." But something about the directness of the question, no pity in it, no performance, made him answer honestly. The young man put his basket down on the floor beside the counter, unzipped his jacket, and reached into the inside pocket. He pulled out a money clip. It wasn't fat. There were maybe 3 or 4 bills folded into it. He peeled off 2 20s and a 10 and set them on the counter next to Desmond's pile. "That should cover it," he said to the pharmacist. The pharmacist looked at both of them, then started counting. Desmond Obi turned to the young man. "I can't take that." "You didn't take it," the young man said without looking at him. "I put it on the counter." "That's different." "That's not." Desmond started, and then stopped, because the young man had bent down, picked up his basket, and was inspecting the back of the cold medicine box like it was the most interesting thing in the pharmacy. The pharmacist finished counting, nodded, and pushed the bag the rest of the way across the counter. "Have a good afternoon," she said, in the tone of someone who has seen everything and is no longer super surprised by any of it. Desmond Obi picked up the bag. He stood there for a moment, holding it, not moving. "At least tell me your name," he said. The young man looked up from the cold medicine. "Lennox," he said. "Lennox Carey." "I'm Desmond. I want to pay you back." "Can I?" "It's February?" Lennox Carey said, and he said it like that explained everything. "It's cold, it's gray, everything costs too much. It's fine. I hope whoever the medication's for feels better soon." He turned back to the shelf to grab a different brand of cold medicine. That was it. That was all. Desmond Obi walked out of the pharmacy and sat in his car for 4 minutes before he started the engine. He didn't cry. He was not a man who cried easily. But he sat there in the parking lot with the bag on the passenger seat, and he thought about a word his mother used to use, a Yoruba word, ewa, which meant beauty in the simplest possible sense. Not the beauty of things that are pleasant to look at, but the beauty of things that are exactly what they should be, a thing doing its purpose without needing to explain itself. Lennox Carey, he thought, 24 years old, Tim Hortons shirt. $50 he clearly couldn't spare. Ewa! What Desmond Obi didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, standing in that parking lot, was what that $50 was. Lennox Carey had been saving for 4 months, not toward anything romantic or ambitious. He had been saving to buy a bus pass, a monthly Presto card, so that he could stop paying per ride and save $11 a week commuting to his 2 jobs. The Tim Hortons on Upper James, and the overnight stocking shift at the grocery warehouse on Barton Street. He'd been 3 weeks away from having enough. Now he was back to 2 months away. He didn't think of it that way, standing at the counter. He thought of it later on the bus home when he added up what he had left and did the math. He sat in the window seat with his cold medicine in his lap and watched Hamilton go by in the gray February light and thought about it calmly. The way you think about things when you've been poor long enough that you stop being surprised by setbacks and start just solving for them. He'd take the Barton bus to his Thursday shift instead of walking. That would add 40 minutes, but save his feet in the cold. It was manageable. Lennox Carey had grown up in Brampton. His father had come from Trinidad in 1987 with a mechanical engineering degree and spent 12 years retraining in Canada before finally getting a job at a manufacturing plant in Mississauga, which closed 6 months before he would have vested his pension. His mother cleaned offices. They had not been people who expected soft landings, and they had not raised Lennox to expect them either. What they had raised him to believe, what his father had said once, plainly, without fanfare, in the way that things said plainly stick with you forever, was this: you're not responsible for why someone is struggling, but if you're standing right there, you're responsible for what you do next. Lennox Carey had been standing right there. So that was that. He got home. He heated up soup. He fell asleep on the couch at 9:30 because his first alarm was set for 5:15. He didn't think about Desmond Obi again for 6 weeks. The call came in on a Thursday. Lennox was on his break at Tim Hortons, sitting in the back with his phone, eating a sandwich he'd made at home because he'd stopped buying food at work. Even with the discount, it added up. His manager, a woman named Patrice, who was fiercely efficient and rarely gave compliments, came to the back and told him he had a call on the store line. Nobody called him on the store line. He went to the front and picked up the receiver, already running through possibilities. His mother. An accident. Something wrong. Is this Lennox Carey? The voice was deep, measured. Calm in the way that people are calm when they've made decisions. Yeah, who's this? My name is Desmond Obi. We met at a Shoppers on Upper James in February. You helped me at the pharmacy counter. Lennox was quiet for a second. I remember, he said. I've been trying to find you for about 3 weeks, Desmond Obi said. A friend of mine recognized the Tim Hortons on your uniform from a photo I described and suggested I try the one nearest to that pharmacy. I've called 4 locations. I want to apologize for the intrusion. It's fine, Lennox said. How'd you know my name was Lennox? You told me. He had forgotten that. Right, I did. My sister is doing better, Desmond Obi said. She's stable. The medication, all 3 bottles, made a significant difference in the first 2 weeks. I wanted you to know that. Lennox leaned against the counter. I'm glad, he said, and meant it. There was a pause. I'd like to return what you gave me, Desmond said, and I'd like to buy you lunch if you're willing, not to make a thing of it. Just, I don't know how to not do something about this. Lennox smiled, a small one at the wall. You don't have to, he said. I know, Desmond said. That's precisely why I want to. They met the following Saturday at a Jamaican restaurant on Concession Street that Desmond said had been there since 1994 and was one of the few places in Hamilton where the oxtail tasted the way it was supposed to. Lennox arrived first and picked a table by the window. He was still in his work clothes. He'd come straight from his Thursday to Saturday morning shift, and he felt briefly self-conscious about it, then decided he didn't have the energy to be self-conscious about things like that. Desmond Obi walked in and Lennox recognized him immediately. He looked different without the worn coat. bigger somehow, a gray sweater, dark trousers. He moved through the restaurant like a man who was used to making quick, confident assessments of rooms. He spotted Lennox, nodded once, and came directly over. He sat down across from him. "You're wearing a Tim Hortons shirt," he said. "I came from work," Lennox said. Desmond nodded. Then he reached into his jacket and slid an envelope across the table. "That's 60, he said. 50 you put on the counter and 10 for the interest. There's no interest. $50 to me in February was the same as 500, Desmond said, evenly, without drama. $10 is not adequate interest. But I didn't think you'd take more than that." Lennox looked at the envelope. He thought about the Presto card. He thought about his father saying, "You're responsible for what you do next." He picked up the envelope and put it in his pocket. "Thank you," he said. Desmond Obi looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up the menu. "What do you usually get here?" he asked. "I've never been here," Lennox said. "Then you're getting the oxtail." He said it like it wasn't a question. "And the fried plantain." "Don't argue about the plantain." Lennox didn't argue about the plantain. They ate, and Desmond talked, not in the way of someone filling silence, but in the way of someone who had decided to be honest. He told Lennox about the retirement, about Adesi, about standing in that pharmacy and going through the math and knowing which bottle he was going to leave behind. He told it without self-pity, in the same measured way he'd had on the phone, like he was giving a case history, like it was important to be accurate. Lennox listened. He was good at listening. People who worked 2 jobs and lived alone got good at it because silence stopped being comfortable after a while, and you learned to fill it properly with real attention. "What do you do?" Desmond asked. "Besides Tim Hortons, overnight stocking, grocery warehouse." Desmond nodded. "How long?" 2 years at the warehouse, 8 months at Tim's. What did you want to do? What were you working toward before all of this?" Lennox thought about that. He hadn't been asked that question in a while. Not by someone who looked like they actually wanted the answer. "Electrician," he said. "I was in the apprenticeship program. Red Seal." "You stopped." "My dad got sick. I needed the night shifts for the money." He said it without complaint, the way you say things that are simply true. "I'm going to go back. I just need to get a few things sorted first." Desmond Obi set down his fork. He looked at Lennox the way he had looked 30 years ago, at surgical residents who didn't yet know what they were capable of. With something that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite pity, but was the specific thing that lives between the two, which is the recognition of a person carrying more than they should have to. "I know people," Desmond said, "at the electrical union, at a few trades organizations. Not in the way of pulling strings. I'm not interested in that. But in the way of making sure your file is actually seen by someone who will read it." Lennox looked at him. "I'm not asking for anything," Desmond said quickly. "That's not why I brought this up. You can tell me to mind my own business." "I'm not going to tell you that," Lennox said. "Then let me ask you something directly. Do you want to finish the apprenticeship?" "Yeah," Lennox said. "I do." "Then don't let anyone make you feel like the timeline you've been handed is the timeline you're stuck with," Desmond said. "The program can be paused. It can be resumed. And the people who got knocked off track by circumstances they didn't choose are not the ones the board wants to lose permanently. They just need someone to say their name in the right room." Lennox was quiet for a moment. "Why would you do that?" he asked. Not suspiciously, genuinely. He wanted to understand the mechanism. Desmond picked his fork back up. He gestured at the table between them. "Same reason you put $50 on a pharmacy counter for a stranger," he said. "I'm standing right here." That was a Saturday in March. By May, Lennox Carey had been formally reinstated in the Red Seal electrician apprenticeship. His hours at the warehouse had been reduced. His choice, once the financial math began to shift, and he was doing his theory coursework online 3 evenings a week. He didn't attribute this to Desmond Obi, exactly. He attributed it to a phone call Desmond had made to a woman named Sandra, who coordinated trades apprenticeship reinstatements for the provincial board, who had looked at his file and said she didn't understand why nobody had followed up with him when he'd deferred. He attributed it to showing up to the reinstatement meeting, having done every piece of reading they'd asked for, and to the 5 years of work history that demonstrated, plainly, that he was the kind of person who didn't stop. He attributed it to his father, who had believed in working with your hands and your head at the same time, and had passed that belief down so completely that it was cellular by now. But he also kept Desmond's number in his phone, and he called him once a month on no particular day to check in on Adeze. She was doing better. She had started coming with Desmond on Saturday mornings to the Jamaican restaurant on Concession Street. She was small and sharp and funny, and the first time she met Lennox, she looked him up and down and said, "So you're the one who wouldn't let my brother come home without my heart medication. Good. He's stubborn and he needed the help." Lennox had laughed. He hadn't expected to laugh. That was the thing about that pharmacy counter, and the $50, and the man in the worn winter coat who had stood there trying not to show the math happening behind his eyes. You never know what you're walking into when you step forward. You never know whose sister is waiting at home for the medication in that white paper bag, or what quiet catastrophes are unfolding behind a composed face. You never know whose story you've just become a part of. You're not responsible for knowing any of that. You're only responsible for what you do when you're standing right there. Lennox Carey had been standing right there. He'd put $50 on a counter, gone home, heated up soup, and fallen asleep at 9:30. He hadn't thought of it as anything remarkable. He still didn't. But somewhere in a house in Hamilton, Desmond Obi's heart was beating steadily. And somewhere in an evening classroom, a young man in a Tim Hortons shirt, who was no longer working at Tim Hortons, was learning how current moves through copper, how to read a circuit, how to find the fault in a system and fix it properly, so nothing breaks down again. The February sky outside had been gray and indifferent, the way it always is. It didn't change for anyone, it never does. But the people underneath it did.